it would be maximize happiness and minimize pain for the greatest number of people. I'd like to begin by doing a brief overview of some biographical facts about the two major philosophers related to utilitarianism. The first is Jeremy Bentham. He was basically a child genius. So when he was 12, his brother went off to university, to Oxford, and Jeremy basically said, I'm going to. At 15, he graduated from Oxford with a legal degree. At 20, he was called to the bar, which means that he was asked to become a judge. And he was the youngest person in England to be called to be asked to be a judge. However, he didn't really practice law. Most of what he did was to work on being a social and a legal reformer. So his goal in life was to make sure that laws were written in such a way to maximize happiness and minimize pain for the greatest number. He's also John Stuart Mill's godfather. So we have a situation here where the father and the godfather physically hand down the philosophy to John Stuart, which is kind of interesting. Bentham was a pretty eccentric character. There is a school called University College, it's in London, and Bentham was very influential in helping to create the school, and so when he died, he deeded his mummified body to the school, basically saying that they had to put it on display specifically where their board met, because I guess he thought that him being there would influence them to make better decisions, or perhaps more utilitarian decisions. So his body is still on display, except his head, because it became a huge prank to steal Jeremy Bentham's mummified head. So there were two instances in which his head was stolen and then eventually returned. So if you decide to fly to London to kick it with Jeremy Bentham, you can hang out with his mummified body, but it's a wax head that's on it. The physical mummified head is being kept in a safe in order to make sure that future University of College of London students don't steal it. And if you're looking for a punk band name, Jeremy Bentham's stolen mummified head, I think, would make a good one. I just asked for 10% of the profits from your band. Next, we have John Stuart Mill. How many letters are in this last name? Are any of them S? No. His name is John Stuart Mill. Mill. There is no S in Mill. He is not General Mills of cereal fame. I am serious about this, folks. If you put an S in his last name, I'm dropping your grade by a letter grade just for that. Do I need to take out a billboard? If somebody could help me figure out how to do more of a song and dance about this, there is no S in Mill. From time to time, I may say Mill's theory, because that is the possessive, okay? But his name is John Stuart, and he doesn't spell it like the Daily Show guy. John-Stuart. John Stuart Mill, no S. Very quickly, let's give him a little bit of a biographical sketch as well. His father, James Mill, was also a utilitarian, and he worked for the East India Company. The East India Company was basically responsible for running most of the Indian territories. So the idea here is that they were responsible for importing tea into England and exporting muslin into the Indian colonies. And for the most part, what they did was to run the Indian colonies. Okay? So James Mill basically worked as an intelligence analyst, if we wanted to put this into contemporary terms. So think back onto our discussion of Chelsea Manning. James Mill would receive the reports of what was going on in the field. He would read them, and then he would compile them into a larger report. He worked from home. So the way that the Mill children were organized was that John Stuart was the youngest, and he would take his lessons directly from his father. So at the age of 3, he was reading in Greek. By the time that most of us were learning how to play with a block and recognize that it was different from a sphere, and we're learning our colors and our shapes, he would have been reading the Credo that you read earlier this semester in the original language. At 8, he was translating into Latin as well, and he was responsible for giving the younger Mill children their lessons. So James Mill would sit at the table and do his work. He would teach some things to John Stuart. Then John Stuart would make sure that the younger Mill children were kept quiet and in line and were learning their lessons so his father could work. Okay? The Mill children were not allowed to play, period, much less with any other children. They had 1 hour of brisk marching exercise every day, and that's it. They weren't allowed to read anything that was deemed a waste of time. So they didn't read the Romantic poets or novels or anything like that. John Stuart had a mental breakdown around the time that he was 20 and was hospitalized. Okay, so at that time he was considered as learned as a man twice his age, but he went into a heavy depression, coming to the conclusion that even if the utilitarian dream were realized and every single law were written to maximize happiness and minimize pain for the greatest number, that he himself would not personally feel happy. 2 things got him out of that depression. One was the Romantic poetry of Wordsworth, and the other was his friendship with Harriet Taylor. The friendship with Harriet Taylor is an interesting conversation because at the time that John Stuart met Harriet, she was married to an older merchant and had several children by him. By all accounts, they maintained a friendship, but when Harriet Taylor's husband died, she basically waited as long as was considered the least amount of time that you could wait to get married in that society, 3 years, and then she went on to marry John Stuart. And it's her daughter who takes care of John Stuart when he subsequently dies. Harriet Taylor was a major influence on him personally as well as philosophically. She heavily edited, possibly co-wrote, or maybe just gave him some feedback. We're not 100% for sure. But if you look at the book on liberty, some versions of it list her as the editor. Some list her as a co-author. We just don't know to what extent they were engaged in a co-authorship. However, what we do know is that he says that she died before she could read the last 2 chapters of the book, and he says that the book is weaker for it. Okay? So she definitely was strongly influencing the book. So let's focus on the utilitarian theory. As I said before, the most important thing for you to remember about this theory is that you're trying to maximize happiness and minimize pain for the greatest number of people. Please note that whether those people are you doesn't matter. So what I'm trying to figure out what to do from a utilitarian perspective, what's step 1 going to be, do you think? Okay, but before I can figure that out...
What's happiness?
Excellent philosophical question, and we'll come back to that.
Who's it going to affect?
Who is what going to affect?
What you're going to do.
Okay, so before you can do anything else, you have to consider all the options of what you're going to do, right? So step 1 is going to be list all the potential things that I could do. Then what you're going to try to do is to figure out among those options which is going to maximize happiness and minimize pain for the greatest number of people. Now let's say that there's an option that gives us 100 smiley faces and 1 frowny face, but that frowny face happens to be yours. Whether those people are you doesn't matter. It's whatever would make you and everybody else the most happy. It's to maximize happiness and minimize pain for the greatest number. Now let's keep this question, what is happiness, in mind as we consider different formulations of utilitarianism. Bentham is going to give us a purely quantitative answer to this question. So in order to answer how do we maximize happiness and minimize pain, and what do we mean by happiness, he's going to say, okay, each person gets to decide for themselves what makes them happy, to answer your question. But we're going to consider these 7 variables in terms of what it means to maximize happiness and minimize pain. The first variable is intensity. How strong of a pleasure are we talking about here? Are we talking about the pleasure of getting to the center of a Tootsie Roll Pop? Or are we talking about the pleasure of seeing your child for the first time? Obviously, your child is going to have a far greater intensity. Second, we have duration. How long does this happiness last? If we're talking about the happiness of the Sistine Chapel, for example, although Michelangelo is long dead, people are still going to the Vatican museums to see the Sistine Chapel today, right? So the duration of the Sistine Chapel is quite long. The duration of eating a Tootsie Roll Pop, the happiness from that might last, I don't know what, 3 minutes? Does that seem like a good number?
Well, we don't know how long it takes to get to the center.
But once you've gotten to the center, the happiness lasts for that long, right? Next, we have certainty. Now remember, Kant says you can't know whether your consequences of your actions are going to make people happy, or even what those consequences might be. So Bentham is going to respond to that by saying, well, I can't be sure, but I can give a probability, right? So if I bring every single person in this class chocolate cake next week, I'm 99.8% sure that that's going to make everybody happy, right? I can give a probability rating to it, certainty. Next, we have propinquity. That's a fun word. It means how quickly does the pleasure come about? Would you rather have $100 right now or $100 a month from now?
A month from now.
What? Right now?
I don't.
Like, I don't need it now, but in a month.
Well, if you take it now, you probably end up spending it
Well, I would take
You go
it
spend
now
it on
because
food.
it's less
Yes,
than
so-
In a month, you might not have 100, and you need 100.
Maybe a month from now I don't actually give it to you,
Ouch.
right?
But we don't know that.
Exactly.
So propinquity says, look, happiness that I get now is better than happiness that I get later, right? So the faster you get the happiness, the better you'll do on this variable. Next, we have fecundity. I don't know why, but students always think that this word is an insult or that it's somehow negative. To be fecund means to be fertile. What this variable is asking is, how likely is this happiness to lead to other happiness? So for example, when we're talking about something like education, education is considered to be a particularly fecund happiness. Because when you learn the story of Romeo and Juliet, right, and you read the Shakespearean play really well, then for the rest of your life, every time that you go to a ballet that is based on Romeo and Juliet, or you see the Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes version, right, the Buzz Luhrmann version of the movie, you know the story, right? So it's happiness that keeps on giving, if you will. That's fecundity. Questions or comments on that?
Oh, I think there was a friend. The French word fécond means to be able to give birth.
Right.
So,
It's the exact same word. It's the same Latin root, right? So if you say of a woman that she's fecund, that she gets pregnant easily, she gives birth easily, she gets pregnant again, right? To be able to easily be fertile. So it's happiness that leads to other happiness, right? Purity is how free from pain is this happiness. And Kate, this gets back to your question about, well, what is happiness? Borrowing from Epicurus, the utilitarians are saying pleasure free from pain. So purity answers this by saying, okay, a happiness that is free from pain is better than a happiness that is very painful. And we can once again, on this Benthian view, we can give a numerical scale to this. So if you're talking about a really torturous love affair, right, that's a very roller coaster love affair, then that's going to have a worse score on purity than a very placid, steady love affair. Now, the tumultuous love affair might score higher on intensity. But in terms of purity, the placid love affair is going to score better. So in terms of purity, imagine that you're sitting down to eat dinner, and you're trying to decide between eating a simple salad with a few olives and a tiny little bit of cheese and a nice glass of water, versus going to the Cheesecake Factory and ordering 2 appetizers, an entree, 2 slices of cheesecake, and washing it down with 2 bottles of wine.
And you're by yourself?
And you're by yourself. How are you going to feel after eating that meal?
Yeah, pretty good. But bloated, like, afterwards. A lot.
After you're done eating that meal, how are you going to sleep that night? How are you going to feel the next day?
Terrible.
Terrible, right? That's a meal that's going to have a lot of pain associated with it. And finally, utilitarianism is a social hedonism. It's hedonism because it's concerned with pleasure, but it's social because it's concerned with how many people will be made happy. So Extent asks, how many people will be made happy by this action? Are we talking about 10, 10,000, 10 billion? And obviously here, the more the merrier. Okay. So John Stuart Mill comes along and says, look, Bentham, you're giving us a purely quantitative understanding of utilitarianism, right? Here are these variables, maximize them. But you're not talking at all about the quality of happiness. And there's a reason here, right? These guys are writing right around the time that the United States is having the revolution. So across the Atlantic, here is an entire nation that is saying life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that each person decides for herself or himself what makes them happy, right? So Bentham has this idea, look, one person, one vote. What makes you happy to a certain extent is up to you. We can talk about these variables, and we can talk about it quantitatively, but qualitatively, that's up to the individual person. And Mill says, look, I agree with you about one person, one vote being cool. But I'm concerned that if we do it that way, that's going to lead to a deterioration of higher culture. Everybody's going to go home, crack open a six-pack, and watch the football game, and nobody is going to go home and read Shakespeare in order to put on a Shakespearean play in the park. And he thinks that qualitatively, reading Shakespeare is better than watching a football game. And that we should be concerned with the quality of happiness as well as the quantity of happiness. So how is Mill going to resolve this issue? He's going to say, look, everyone should get a vote, yes, but only if they have experienced both lower pleasures and higher pleasures. And then he argues that anybody who has experienced both, or just about anybody who has experienced both, would agree that the higher pleasures are better. So we get the famous line here from Mill that it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. I don't know if you've heard, but one of the things that rich people are doing now is to have pet pigs. And there are spas for their pet pigs.
Oh my.
Yeah.
So that, you know, when you go on vacation, you can send your pet pig to be on vacation too.
Do they
Right?
still eat bacon? Do the people still eat bacon?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
So-
it's like, really? What? So are those vegetarian? Rich people?
Do I look like the sort of person who's friends with somebody with a pet pig that they're sending to a spa? I have no idea. Okay, I mean, and if there's anybody with a pet pig who's sending their pet pig to a spa who is watching this video and would like to be friends with me, I'm not saying that I wouldn't be friends with you. I'm just saying that at the moment, I don't have any friends rich enough to have a pet pig that they're sending to a spa. Okay, so imagine for a second this pet pig that is getting sent to a day spa, right? It's getting mud bath and a massage, right? All of the things that a pet pig might desire. Right? It's having the best day a pig can possibly have. Mill's point here is that it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied, right? Socrates on a day that he's pissed off at the world. Why? Because Socrates is capable of philosophizing. He's capable of going to Aristophanes' play and trolling Aristophanes, right? He's capable of a higher quality of pleasure than a pig. So it's better to be Socrates on a day that is dissatisfying because Socrates is capable of a higher quality of pleasure than to be a pot-belly pig that is the pet of a rich person at the spa. Make sense? There are some concerns with utilitarianism. One of them is, does it adequately deal with the particular attachments that we have to specific people? There are some people whose happiness is more important to me than the happiness of other people. And I imagine that that is the case for many of you as well. For example, imagine that an evil philosopher has put you in the following situation. You are on a narrow strip of land. In the left-hand lake, the lake on your left-hand side, your child is drowning. In the lake on your right-hand side, two strangers' children are dying. And let's say for the sake of argument that you can dive into the second lake and pull out both kids at once. What is utilitarianism going to say that you should do in this situation? Save the two children, right? Because it's going to maximize happiness and minimize pain for the greatest number to save two children than it does save one. For those of you who are parents, are any of you going to let your child drown so that you can go save somebody else's kids? Is anybody going to dive into the right-hand lake to save the stranger's children?
I will.
Where are they parents at?
Your own kid does.
If you have somebody with you.
Not if you see.
I mean, maybe after you've saved your own kid,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? Then you're going to go pull their dead bodies out of the water. But you're not going to save the stranger's children before you save your own. Why? Because your child's happiness is more important to you than some two random strangers' children that you don't know.
They should have had better parents.
Well, your child is also drowning, right? We began this by saying, imagine an evil philosopher has placed you in the following situation. So for all we know, the children have been kidnapped by this evil philosopher who's then stranded you on this narrow strip of land, right? I mean, the whole scenario is hackneyed, is all get out.
Right.
But the whole point is to get at this idea that does utilitarianism deal with the fact that some people's happiness is more important to me than the happiness of others? Okay. More concrete example, if that one seems a little too fantastical for you. The most famous living utilitarian, most people would agree, is a man named Peter Singer. He's an Australian philosopher. He teaches at Princeton University, makes a really good salary. From what I understand, donates a large percentage of it to charity. Okay. Peter Singer's mom got sick, and she needed to be put in a nursing home. And he paid to put her in a really nice, expensive nursing home. And then he went to a philosophy conference where somebody asked him, why didn't you put your mother in a cheaper nursing home and send the difference in the cost to helping people who are more unfortunate? And I wasn't there, but from what I understand, Singer's answer was basically to say, you're right that that's what utilitarianism would require of me. Maybe I'm not as good a utilitarian as I should be. But that raises the question, does this theory require us to go above and beyond what any person would reasonably do? Or what philosophers call, does it require supererogatory acts? If it turns out that nobody would think it right to save the two strangers' children and let their own child drown, then is this theory really do you know what I'm trying to say? Does the rubber meet the road on this particular theory? Sean, go ahead.
So the thing about the two kids is, in theory, yeah, we would like to say we would save the two kids because choose more than one, but when it came down to it, all we would be thinking about is our kid. We wouldn't, it would be nature for us to think of our kid first than the other two. Just natural instincts.
Okay, but I mean, in certain cases or instincts are not necessarily moral, right? So just because we say I have an inclination towards saving my child doesn't necessarily mean that that's the moral thing to do. On the other hand, if the theory requires us to do something that as a matter of fact no one would do, then that calls into question some aspects of the theory. So for example, care ethics, which is very concerned with the particulars and the relationships of the situation, would say that it is moral and good to have caring relationships with certain people, and that it makes sense that when you have a caring relationship with someone, which hopefully you do to your child, right? Then it would make sense that you would prioritize that person's life and happiness. So this really gets at this idea that one of the things that may seem attractive about utilitarianism is that it's saying, okay, everybody's happiness is equal, right? We all like equality. But on the other hand, we have to deal with the fact that some people's happiness is more important to us than others. But is that the way that it ought to be? Or is that maybe a problem that humans have? These are all important philosophical questions for us to consider. I don't know what it would mean for Mr. Data from Star Trek to have a child. But let's say that Data is in this same situation, and in the left-hand side it's Captain Picard drowning, and in the right-hand side it's 3 children drowning. What do you think Data would do?
Save their guy.
Probably the 3 kids.
I'm thinking Data would save the 3 children, right? He would say, well, Picard is older, right? So the amount of happiness that he can still have, and, you know, let's say for the sake of argument that he's now retired as captain of the Enterprise.
He can't hold his breath a little longer.
Okay.
Thanks, by the way, to Sean for saving me for not having brought my own recording equipment. We'll make sure to put a note to you on the YouTube channel.
Subscribe to this channel.
So, one concern has to do with particular attachments, right? We're concerned with the happiness of individual people more so than other people. And utilitarianism says I'm supposed to maximize happiness and minimize pain for the greatest number, regardless of whether those people are me or people I care about. Then we have the question, what do we do in situations where maximizing happiness conflicts with minimizing pain? Every time that utilitarianism talks about this, right, anytime that you read Bentham or Mill, they always say maximize happiness and minimize pain, or minimize pain and maximize happiness in one sentence. But you could imagine situations in which we've done step 1, right? We've listed all of the possible actions, and we have one option which gives us 80 smiley faces and 20 frowny faces, and another one that gives us 100 happy faces and 40 frowny faces. If we're trying to maximize happiness, we're going to go with option 2. But if we're trying to minimize pain, we're going to go with option 1. Even though the net utility of the 2 options would be the same, right? 60 happy faces. So, some concerns with the theory, because one of the questions that I want you to be asking yourself is which of these theories is stronger or weaker, right? So obviously I want you to compare utilitarianism with deontology, right? These are the two major theories that we're getting since the midterm. Most of you will be using at least one of those theories in your paper. Let me pause the projector for a second. We'll turn it back on in a moment. But I want us to practice an actual case of applying utilitarianism to deal with a situation. Does anyone have a moral quandary or have a friend with a moral quandary that they would like to share? If not, I can borrow from a former student in a former semester, but if any of you have a fresh one, I'd be willing to take it. Moral problems, going once, going twice? None of you writing into Dear Abby? Okay, so here's the situation that a former student had. She was working as a bartender and had a manager who was cheating on his wife. And she was friends with the wife. And the wife kept calling her, saying, is my husband cheating on me? Is my husband cheating on me? Is my husband cheating on me? And she didn't know what to do, so when I asked this question, she raised her hand and said, okay, here's my situation. All right. So, as good utilitarians, what's step one? We have to list the options. So what could she do?
Say, or tell her, don't tell her.
Well, it's a little more complicated than that. So one option is to tell the wife, right? And then we have to consider the smiley faces and the frowny faces. One of the frowny faces is that she's most likely to be immediately fired by the manager.
Yes.
Right? Texas is a fire at will state. Bartenders, for example, are not legally allowed to do shops with their clients. Anybody who's tended bar will let you know that if a table buys a round of shots and asks you to do the shot with them, you do it. So all the manager has to do is wait until she does something that she's not supposed to do, and then she gets fired on the spot for it, right? So most likely, if she tells the wife the truth, she's going to get fired. What are some other options?
To lie.
Lie.
Lie to the wife and cover for him. Okay, what else?
So the person who's cheating.
I don't know.
Black.
You can tell the boss, like, hey, your wife's calling me, and I know you're cheating on her, so.
In this particular case, she already had it. Basically, the boss was like, you want to keep your job?
Damn.
Do nothing, I guess.
Okay, so change your number, avoid the wife,
Quit your
stall.
job. Stall.
Tell her, that's the boss.
Okay.
Tell her.
Another option might be,
Set the boss up.
well, okay, we'll get to that. I heard find another job, then tell her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't use him as a reference.
Yeah, don't use him as a reference.
Arrange an accident in fix.
Okay, so set up the boss, right?
The
Yeah.
wife comes in and he's in the restaurant cheating.
Okay, where the wife comes in and she sees that the guy is cheating on her without her having to tell him. For context, the wife had just given birth to her second child. So
Oh.
she's not going to be running around
No.
in the middle of the night to go to the bar
What a jerk.
to be trying to catch him, right? Not. So we had to list this option, but the problem here is it's not really feasible.
Yeah.
Okay, so the point here is that we now have to consider all of the possible outcomes to everyone. The husband, the wife, the bartender, their two children,
What about
all of the relevant actors.
the mistress?
Oh, it's a revolving door.
Oh.
But we have to consider all of them, right? So each of the women that he's picking up that night are having
It's a
some...
Matt Lauer.
Pardon?
It's a Matt Lauer situation. Matt Lauer getting fired from NBC for affairs
Oh, yeah.
and all his...
I was under the impression that that wasn't quite as consensual.
No, it's yeah,
legit.
it's
It's
it
like
happened
the
on
most
multiple
recent.
occasions.
Legit.
That's the most recent thing.
Okay, so bringing it back to the current situation, well, this happened a few years ago, but the one that we're currently discussing, it's a revolving door type of situation, right? But we have to consider the unhappiness. So if you tell the wife, the bartender's going to get fired, the boss is going, or the manager is going to be upset. The wife is going to initially be upset,
But then she's gonna be happy, that's what I told her.
but more long term, the wife is going to be happy, right? Because she can
She told her the
know
truth.
what's really going on and rebuild her life. So one of the things that we kind of have to consider is, when are we supposed to take the snapshot? And that's a legitimate question to ask in terms of utilitarianism. Griff?
In like long term, probably the bartender will be more happy if she tells the wife. Interesting. I mean, keeping it secret like that.
It depends on how she feels about the job, I guess.
And yeah.
You know, and then we have to consider it to the women. So maybe their short-term happiness is greater because now he's single and they can have even more fun, right? I'm not sure here. So point being, we would go through and do the utilitarian analysis for each of these options, which for the sake of time, I'm not going to do all of them. But there are two things that I want to point out. First of all, reasonable utilitarians might disagree on what the likely consequences are. So you might have a utilitarian who says, wait and then tell her after you found another job, because they think a certain aspect of the calculus. And another one might think, tell the wife immediately. For example, some of this is going to depend on, point 2, how many of the possible consequences you've considered. So in the class where this came up, we went through and we filled out the whole board, right? Spent 45 minutes doing it. And then at the end, I asked the bartender, there is a problem that you're not considering that I would like you to answer the question of. We'll edit that sentence later. There's a problem that we're not considering here. Is the husband using protection when he is cheating on the wife with this revolving door of women? And is the wife using protection when she's having sex with the husband?
Obviously not, because they have 2 kids.
And the bartender's face fell, and she basically said, the wife is still nursing. So most likely, no, she's not using condoms when she's having sex with her husband. And I really don't think that he's using condoms when he's having sex with these women. And I said, okay, well now under the negatives of lying, stalling, find another job, then tell her, we have to add the possibility of her having an STI, potentially HIV, and if she does get HIV, the possibility of her transmitting it to the baby that she's nursing, because that's a non-zero possibility. Granted, how likely is that is another question, right? So some utilitarian might give a high level of probability to that. Another utilitarian might give it a lower probability. But being based on what probability you give it, but that is a consequence that you have to consider that the student had not. So at the end of the conversation, she basically said, I can't deal with the guilt that I would feel if I wait until I find another job to tell her, and in the interim, she turns out to contract a disease that I could have prevented. which granted is her own feeling of discomfort, but that added to the possibility. The student did end up telling the wife. She did get fired, and then a month later she found another job. Go ahead.
So couldn't she tell the wife, but ask her not to reveal how she found out?
Well, she says, I found it at the bar, and you know your bartender's working there constantly and might see you with all these women.
The
You're
boss
going to assume it's the
can't
bartender.
argue. The boss is going to be
But
suspicious who
without
told her.
proof, I mean, he's just.
He's
wouldn't
suspecting
know.
anybody.
Well, she's also
Yeah,
like, you guys.
I'm sure she's not the only one that's working there all the time.
Well,
Does
she's
the
like
wife
really
knows?
close friends with the bartender, so the bartender's gonna have like.
I mean, I don't know how close of friends they were,
No, yeah.
but
Close enough to
But
ask
like,
her.
the wife could reveal that she found out in multiple ways other than your bartender told me.
Well, also, like, would you even want to work there still with that as your manager? Like,
That's what
if
If it pays
if like
good.
then you'd have that
Bartending
hanging
If it
out.
pays good, just mind your business.
If- I mean, it's
Not for my
So-
friend. Not for my friend who worked part.
I really appreciate that you guys are considering multiple other options, right? Tell the wife, but swear her to secrecy. Well, what is she going to do? Not tell the husband that she knew? And it's pretty reasonable that in this situation, the husband would know whether the wife confirms it or not that she found out from the bartender. Regardless, in this particular situation, the actor believed that once she told the wife, her days on the job were numbered. And that turned out to be accurate. Go ahead.
If she had documented any of this, don't you think she would have had a case? Like if she wanted to? I mean, obviously that costs a lot of money, but
Where the boss
I mean,
tells you.
if you documented the fact that you know.
I mean, look, I'm not an employment lawyer. This is the part where I give you the legal disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not allowed to give legal advice. But I would remind you that Texas is a work at will state, which means that winning an unemployment or a wrongful termination suit, is incredibly difficult. And as long as the manager is able to say, no, the reason I fired you is because you did a shot with a client, and that's against TABC policy, it's fairly straightforward for him to fire her and her not be able to do anything about it. But we could list that, right, as an option.
But if she
Tell the
knew
wife,
that-
document it, get fired, and then sue him.
Well,
Yeah.
the wife was getting all his money anyways because he got caught cheating. So she would have made a lot of money anyways.
Not necessarily.
Well, my accounting professor said that here in Texas, if the husband or the wife gets caught cheating, then you have to pay full compensation of whatever you have.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure she knows what she's saying.
Let's go ahead and go back to utilitarianism. There are a couple of problem cases that I want us to consider, okay? And one of them has to do with a famous case. It's so famous that we refer to it as the problem of Sam, okay? So Sam goes to visit his aunt who has dementia in the hospital. He has no friends or other family members who will miss him, right? He's kind of living a dead-end life, dead-end job, no coworkers, nobody who cares about him, except his aunt who he goes to visit, but she doesn't remember it because she has dementia. There are 5 people, all very important persons, in this hospital. They're awaiting an organ transplant. If they do not receive the organ transplant soon, let's say in the next 2 hours, right? So we're reasonably sure that they're not going to receive an organ in time. They will die. Should the surgeons operate on the principle of utility, pun intended, and anesthetize Sam, kill him, and harvest his organs in order to save the 5 very important persons? What would it appear utilitarianism would say should happen in this situation?
Kill Sam.
It would appear, right, that if we're trying to decide between 1 person dying and 5 people dying, that what would maximize happiness and minimize pain for the greatest number is to kill Sam and harvest his organs. Go ahead.
5 people would die anyways, no? Because they
depends if their body rejects the organ or not.
Do they all
They're
need the same
compatible.
organs, or are they different organs?
No, 5 different organs, and Sam is a compatible donor for all of them.
Like the movie 9 Pounds.
Do you really think those people would be
Even
happy
volunteer,
if they know their organs come from someone that was killed?
Well, is Sam consenting to this? Like, is
No, Sam is, okay, so to answer the questions, no, Sam is not consenting to this. And when people receive organs, they generally don't know where the organs are coming from.
That's all you get. No.
Yeah.
Later you
But
can
like,
find
this is
out,
also a
but
place where like it would,
But they would tell you that they murdered
wouldn't actually
Sam.
happen.
They probably would leave that out, probably. They're like, oh,
just sign here.
their organ just happened to come in today.
By the way, your evidence, so don't talk too many times.
Yeah. The ant that was with
Okay, I just want you to consider another case, quickly for the interest of time. This case, also very famous in philosophy, is called the trolley problem. So once again, you're asked to decide between 5 people dying and 1 person dying. This time there's a runaway train, but there's a lever. If you do nothing, the train will kill 5 people. But if you pull the lever, it's going to kill 1 person. And from just looking at your faces, most of you are saying, yeah, I would pull the lever.
where's the catch?
But
I would
So
say
here's
that-
my question
what's
to
the
you.
catch? Like, who's that one person?
Here's my question to you. Why is it that you're willing to kill Sam with a messy and painful train, but not kill him under anesthetic surgical conditions?
Oh, it's Sam.
love it, Sam.
Oh.
Well, I thought it was me anyway.
That was
I
just a
thought I was
random
the one
person.
pulling
You'll
the
never know who it was.
So potentially, it might be the case that you pull the lever and the 1 person you kill is Sam, and the 5 people that you save are these same VIPs. For all we know, the reason why they were in the hospital was because somebody refused to pull the lever in the first example, right? But what I find interesting is that in the case of Sam, overwhelmingly students will say, no, it's immoral, no matter what utilitarianism might say, and we'll get back to whether utilitarianism actually says to kill Sam to harvest his organs. But when it comes to pulling the lever, you're fine with killing the 1 to save the 5.
Because Sam has a name.
Yeah.
Now, hang on
We
a
don't know
second.
who the other
The
people
fact that Sam has a name would be interesting, especially if we were going to consider this in the context of care ethics. Because care ethics might say, look, the fact that Sam has a name has now given us a certain attachment to Sam. Right? We know about him that he's at least willing to go visit his elderly aunt with dementia. Whereas in the trolley problem, you're just saying 5 people versus 1 person. Now let me tell you something. All 6 of those people do, as a matter of fact, have names. Right?
Oh, yeah.
But we
You just
know
don't know them in the case of the trolley problem.
if we-
And you do in the problem of Sam. Which is interesting, because I think the only reason historically we came to call this the case of Sam was just because we needed a way to refer to it easily. Okay? It wasn't intended for us to have a biography of Sam. And yet, many of you will say, but I feel a certain attachment to Sam. Like, okay, he's a loser now, but maybe later in life he's going to grow up to do something constructive. At the very least, he's willing to go visit his sick aunt. He seems like a nice guy. You know, like, okay, maybe he's a little down on his luck now, but that doesn't mean that he couldn't make things better later. Whereas in the trolley problem, all 6 of these people are completely anonymous. Since you don't actually have a relationship with Sam, it shouldn't matter. And yet effectively, it seems like it does. And that gets back to that concern that we were having with utilitarianism earlier about it might appear that some people's happiness is more important to us than others. Even fictional Sams who go to visit their dementia-stricken moms. I have Sean and then Isaac.
So I was just thinking maybe people might think differently if maybe he, like on his driver's license, it says organ donor. If he was going to be an organ donor anyways. I wonder if people might feel like, well, I mean, he's...
Okay, so a couple of things here. One is that I would mention that feelings are things like happiness and sadness. So I might ask what thoughts are being had. But that's an interesting point because some people have said, don't become listed as an organ donor because if you do, doctors might not fight as hard to save your life.
That's good to know.
Well, and I'm not saying that this actually happens.
Some
But the problem is, when you look at how many people are listed as organ donors, very few people are. So if it turns out that the reason people are not being listed as organ donors is that they're afraid that if they're listed as organ donors, it will make it easier for people in an emergency situation to decide to allow them to die in order to harvest their organs, then in terms of the long-term utility, that's an issue, right? So I would be scared to ask the question, is Sam listed as an organ donor? Because whether he's listed as an organ donor or not, organ donation means after I die, I'm okay with you giving me taking my organs.
Well, they just
Not-
themselves.
Isaac, go ahead.
I had a question, but I'm good now.
Ashraf.
Yeah, the reason I said it wasn't more in the case of Sam is because it said 5 people, all VIPs. And I don't think it's moral to kill somebody because they're just VIPs. That's why I said it was immoral. When in the case of the trend, the 5 people or 6, and killing one person, I know that
So your problem with these people is that they're really exemplary.
they're VIPs and
Well,
they
maybe
shouldn't kill the
they're
guy
rich.
just because they're VIPs.
Would things change if you knew the other?
Okay, so would it help if we said one of them is Taylor Swift, the other person is, no Taylor Swift fans in the room I see, okay? Never mind, David Bowie before he died. Better answer?
Yeah, I feel like it would help if it says all who have no friends or other family members who will donate to them. Then in that case...
No, the point here is to set this up as these are 5 people who are very important to the community. Like, let's say that one is about to discover the cure for cancer. The other is the most celebrated musician on the planet.
Well, now it's just really stacked.
But that's the concern with utilitarianism. Can we get to a point where we stack the deck so much that it would become obvious that yes, we kill Sam? Because what's Kant going to say to this?
No.
9,
Yeah.
right? It is absolutely impermissible to kill Sam to harvest his organs. You would be using him as a means only, not as an end unto himself. And yet it would appear that utilitarianism has a problem here. That's why this is set up as the problem of Sam, not the easy to deal with case of Sam, right? Okay.
I'm gonna.
Utilitarians say, okay, we can get out of this. The way that we're going to get out of this is to draw a distinction between act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to talk about both Bentham and Mill as being act utilitarians, with Mill being qualitatively bent and Bentham being quantitatively bent, though other people present this differently and with good reason. But the idea here is that in the classical presentation of utilitarianism, we take the action that is occurring and we apply the principle of utility in that moment to that situation only. Rule utilitarianism is influenced by Kantian ethics, but different. It says, state a rule and then assess the utility of that rule as a whole. So the rule utilitarian can say, look, we can make a rule that says if there are runaway trains, pull the lever so that it goes down the path that kills the least number of people. And that rule would maximize happiness and minimize pain for the greatest number. On the other hand, if we make a rule that people who go to visit sick relatives in hospitals can have their organs harvested, is that a rule that's going to maximize happiness and minimize pain? No. Because a lot of people are going to say, look, I'm not going to visit anybody in a hospital. Good point. Others are going to say, you know what, I'm not sure I'm comfortable receiving that organ if I know that the person who gave it to me was murdered for it to be harvested. Right? And as an aside, if I find out that people visiting the hospital at, say, Breckenridge are being killed to have their organs harvested, if I have a broken arm, I'm not going to the emergency room. Right? I know I'll survive the broken arm. I may not survive having my kidney harvested. right? So the idea here is that rule utilitarianism is supposed to solve for the problem of Sam by saying instead of applying the principle of utility with a narrow scope to this specific situation, we have to consider the general utility of behaving like this all the time. Okay, now the question becomes, does rule utilitarianism get us out of the problem? And in order to present that question, we're all Northridge students. I want us to consider how we're going to get out of the parking lot today.
Through the exit.
Depending on which exit.
Where the car is at?
Now,
How do you get here? How do you leave?
let's say for the sake of argument that you are driving and that you live at Parmer and Metric, right? Now, as you guys know,
You can walk.
there is an exit out of the parking lot onto Metric
Yeah.
with a stop sign and what?
No left turns.
And a no left turn sign.
Yeah.
And people do it all the time.
And how many times have you seen somebody disobey this no left turn sign?
Every morning.
One time.
Okay,
But
That's where I live.
I'll admit it.
hang on a second.
Just skip the light.
So, a Kantian pulls up to this stop sign. How are they going to behave?
We stop.
You stop.
The Kantian is going to say, I have a perfect duty not to disobey traffic laws. So the Kantian is going to
Turn right.
not turn left. They could go straight, right? Or they could turn right.
And do a U-turn at the light.
And do a U-turn at the light.
Yeah.
Okay. An act utilitarian pulls up to the light. Or to the stop sign, excuse me. What's the act utilitarian going to do? They're going to consider the utility in that moment. Right? So they're going to take a look around, consider the likelihood of pissing off the people behind them, causing a wreck. Let's say for the sake of argument, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, right? The act utilitarian parked at ACC, went across the street, sang some tunes at Canary Roost, finished karaoke, came back, got their car, they're now pulling up to the stop sign. What's the act utilitarian going to do in that moment?
Turn left.
Go left.
It's going to maximize her happiness to turn left. It's not going to maximize anybody else's pain. The act utilitarian is going to turn left. What about a rule utilitarian?
Go right.
Great answer, but why?
They want to obey the rules.
Negative. That's not the reason why.
Okay.
Rule utilitarianism says pick a rule and figure out whether that rule maximizes happiness or minimizes pain. That doesn't mean obey all laws. There may be instances in which a rule utilitarian breaks the law
Oh well.
each and every time if they ascertain that breaking the law maximizes happiness and minimizes pain in general. Dashe?
It would make everyone else behind you happier because you'd get out of the way faster.
Yeah.
So the rule utilitarian is going to consider the utility in general. So even though it's currently 3 o'clock in the morning, the rule utilitarian is going to consider how pissed off people get being stuck behind somebody who's trying to make this illegal left turn each and every time. And the rule utilitarian is going to turn left. No. The rule utilitarian is going to turn right even though in that moment there is nobody behind them. Because the rule that most maximizes happiness and minimizes pain in general is to turn right and do the U-turn. Okay, now here's the catch. What if we make the rule complex and we say, turn left only when there are 2 or fewer cars behind you? Right? Now you're not pissing off any of those people. So this newfangled complex rule utilitarian, what are they going to do at 3 o'clock in the morning?
Turn left.
Turn left. What are they going to do at 4:30 in the afternoon?
Turn right.
Turn right. So if you're sitting over here and you're watching them, would you be able to tell the difference between the complex rule utilitarian and an act utilitarian?
No. It depends on every scenario.
In just about every scenario, the complex rule utilitarian is going to behave exactly in the same way as the act utilitarian. So getting back to the problem of Sam, if we say, okay, it's only permissible to kill somebody and harvest their organs in situations where the person won't be missed and nobody finds out about it. Now it would appear that the rule utilitarian solution doesn't get us out of the problem as much as we thought it did. So for those of you who are saying, I'm not sure that I could follow either of these theories, I have two extra credit possibilities for you. One is to live a day as a utilitarian. But you have to apply the principle of utility to every decision that you make, think through it, show me that that's what you've done. For one day. Option two is to live a day as a Kantian. So once again, live your entire day considering perfect and imperfect duties, applying the categorical imperative, and then write a journal about the situation and upload it under the extra credit option.
Just stay in bed all day. Decisions are easy.
Okay, if you sit around in bed all day, you're not breaking the categorical imperative, but are you fulfilling your imperfect duties?
No.
Any last questions on utilitarianism? So what's the most important thing for you to remember about utilitarianism? Maximizing happiness and minimizing pain for whom?
The greatest number of people.
The greatest number of people. Hang on, I still have 2 minutes. How do we determine who's a person?
Rational?
Okay, you guys are all giving answers based on Kant. For utilitarians, a person is capable of feeling pain and pleasure, right? So utilitarians may also be concerned with the pain and pleasure of non-human animals. In certain cases, they'll give it less weight depending on the formulation. So for those of you who are doing animal-based topics, right, like medical testing on animals, for example, if you're doing utilitarianism, you have to decide how are you going to, if at all, consider the pain to the non-human animals. But certainly that is something to consider. Or future people. There are some utilitarians that say that the happiness of children who have not yet been born should be taken into consideration when making ethical deliberations. So for example, if we're going to build a factory that we know is going to pollute land that is not currently habitated but may be in the future, then the future people who may someday wish to inhabit that land and now cannot might need to be taken into consideration. So please understand that different utilitarians are going to answer that question in a different way, right? And certainly that's to talk about what is a person is a meta-ethical question. We have to answer that before we can then take the normative ethical theory and apply it to a specific situation. Thanks.